Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We will be continuing with the next chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. This week's baking inspiration comes to us from a site called Runaway Rice, and if you find the sound of pandan waffles as delicious as I did, be sure to check out their website for more details on the recipe. Without any further ado, let's get into a quick recap and get started. Last time, I barely scraped through another challenge and encountered a real piece of work who explained that all the production team was in on this depraved scheme. After exchanging some choice words, we were back in the kitchen to make cinnamon swirl bread. Things were not going well for Samantha, who looked helplessly destined to go home. In a last-ditch effort to save her, I orchestrated a scheme to swap her spot with Cheyenne's, who had been signaling which one was hers to Peter by putting it in the same spot every day. Samantha was unhappy with me for manipulating the outcome of the challenge, and in the next competition 2 days later, finally had enough and let Peter have a piece of her mind. Chapter 4. Life's like a box of chocolates. The other competitors in the production team stood silent as Samantha angrily eyed Peter as he ordered the guards to keep her from leaving. "Jig is up, Petey," she said. "I'll put my mess of a bake in Cheyenne's spot, and that's the only reason you let me move to the next round." Peter's cold blue eyes turned to me. "On, is that true?" he asked. "Have you been telling people I'm having an affair?" I stared daggers at him. "Telling people? You are. That is not in question." I didn't know at the time for sure that he was rigging things for her. I just felt so bad for Samantha and didn't want her to go home. So I did it as a last-ditch effort, and it confirmed what I thought. "I'm sorry, Samantha," I said, turning to her. Her face softened. In that moment, I had another idea. I kept talking. "I think this whole competition has been proven to be completely unfair. I think we need to call it off." "Now that's something I completely agree with." Samantha backed me up. "At the very least, we need to invite all the contestants back and have a redo." The production team snickered nervously amongst themselves. I was breathing heavily. She had no idea that was impossible. Digging our heels into that suggestion could work, though. I may have accidentally caused a spark that lit our one way out of here. I needed to keep up the pressure. I turned towards Marcus and Dylan. "You two agree with us, don't you?" I asked. "It's not fair if this has been rigged from the start. We should boycott." Dylan brought a hand to his chin. "That does only seem fair." "I think Hotshot is onto something here," Marcus said. "I have noticed a discrepancy in how Peter judges the young lady versus how Penelope does. I'm not inclined to participate in a competition like this." Holy guacamole! This was working. I turned towards Samantha, who seemed in a much better mood, knowing that the group was with us on this. Johnny seemed a little out of sorts and did not chime in, but that was not unusual for him. I'm still not sure I ever heard him talk. The production team was in shambles, and security was looking for direction, but no one could give it to them. Their house of cards was tumbling down on them finally. Or at least that's what I thought, before Peter let out a big sigh. "I resent and deny these accusations wholeheartedly," he said. "I would never put my integrity as a judge and a baker aside just for some cheeky fling." I had a view of Cheyenne from my peripheral. That looked like it cut her deeply. "There's no way to redo the competition. We were already on a tight enough deadline as it was," he continued. "Here's what I can do, though. I will recuse myself from judging. Is that enough to satiate everyone for now?" "Of course not," I said. "This whole thing is already tainted by all of this." I looked around, and to my dismay, it seemed the tides were turning on me. I think it's the best we're going to get, Hotshot," Marcus said. "I'm good with it." "Yeah, sorry, An. I think this is a fair compromise," Dylan said. I looked around the room, desperate for someone to agree with me. I looked towards Cheyenne, who seemed a bit uncomfortable. "Cheyenne, what do you think?" She paused for a moment, looking deep in thought, then she huffed and moved her hair out of her eyes. "I really wish you would shut up," she said. "Hey, that's my girl you're talking about there," Samantha said. "And you better watch yourself, because there's nothing to protect you now. Come on, An, let's get to it." She went back to her station. Just like that, my way out was crumbling before me. Tama and Bahama, who had been particularly quiet through that whole ordeal, counted us back down and put us back at the time we left off at. I eyed Peter angrily as he walked off to the side. He seemed equally frustrated with me, and that I had bent him this far. Penelope was also unusually silent for the whole thing, seeming a bit agitated with Peter for the most part, but it was hard to say. I put in my pastries, waited an agonizing amount of time, and pulled them out of the oven with time to spare. Penelope did all of the judging. Mine turned out great, as did most of the others. Even Cheyenne's, unfortunately. She took a little time to mull over her decision. "Bakers, Penelope has made the tough decision solo to send someone home," Bahama said. And this time, it's going to be Johnny. I had no interest in saying goodbye. I could not take it. I could not look into the eyes of another person who was about to march to their death because I could not save them. I went to leave the challenge area, but I was stopped by security. "Hey, what gives?" I asked. Bahama came up to me. "Unfortunately, that little fiasco ate into what was already a really tight day on time. It's going to be pastries for lunch for you lot, and then we're going to have to go right back into the mystery challenge." He picked up one of my bon pate and handed it to me with a wink. I was a bit annoyed as I went back to my area. Then, as my eyes scanned the room, I started to panic a bit. The people remaining were Cheyenne, Marcus, Dylan, Samantha, and myself. Assuming that Peter was not going to leave his fling partner out to dry, there was no room for everyone who I had gotten to know to continue staying through the competition. I felt myself sweat as I nervously bit into my lunch. What move did I have left? The effort to get people to boycott was my last big chance at getting people out of here safely. I was stuck with a choice. Do I put the mask on, continue giving it my all, and potentially subject one of my friends to their demise? Or should I take off the mask and throw the competition? What would happen to Leah, though? "Darling," Samantha said in a whisper, "what happens to people who get kicked out of here?" I stuffed my bon pate in my mouth and pretended I had a mouthful of food at the time she asked. She looked at me with that glance of motherly disapproval that I was getting so used to seeing. They were getting the ingredients out for the upcoming challenge onto our tables, but in that moment they were out of earshot. She continued questioning. "I need you to tell me, Ann," she said. "The way you act every time someone has to go home, the way your mood changed during lunch on day one, something ain't right here, is it?" I felt the wires of my microphone press into my back like a burning whip. My voice caught in my throat as I struggled to say anything. There was no doubt in my mind that they were recording us. I brought a finger to hover right by my face. "I think it's just so sad the way they have to leave after they execute their bakes to the best of their ability." I tapped my nose on the word execute. My eyes scanned to ensure there were no cameras on us. Samantha's eyes widened. "The way everyone is watching us," tap. "I feel like there's no escape," tap. "From the pressure of trying to perform. It's a despair that's hard to communicate," tap. "I really wish I could just help them somehow, but I feel so unable to help myself even." I just repeatedly tapped my nose for the entirety of that last sentence. Samantha stared in utter shock at me, looking at me to reveal I was making some awful and obscene joke, but I just stared back at her with a straight face. "Alrighty, bakers," Thomas said. "It's time for your next challenge, set by Peter, but judged by Penelope due to Peter getting sick." "Penelope, if you were Peter, what do you think he would say?" Bahama asked. "I think he would say to be mindful of the temperature and don't let anything melt." She stepped out without even being asked to before they could get to their usual joke. She seemed fed up with this whole situation. It did make me wonder if she had any idea what was going on behind the scenes. At this point, I was pretty sure that Peter did, but I could not get a read on her as easily. "I guess she had somewhere better to be," Thomas said. "Your challenge, bakers, is to make 6 identical triple chocolate cheesecakes with a chocolate crumble base, a sweet chocolate cheesecake center, and a dark chocolate ganache to top it all off." Sounds easy enough. I like cheesecake, so I figured in spite of Penelope's loose directions, I was going to be able to figure this one out. 3, 2, 1, bake. I started to mix together my cocoa base and preheat my oven when something started to feel weird. I wet my brow just to notice I had been sweating quite a bit. The lodge had a reputation for not being well temperature controlled, but it was a beautiful day outside. I looked around to see Dylan pulling on the collar of his shirt as well. Marcus was trying to tough through it, but even he looked like he was glistening. "It's kind of like really hot in here," Cheyenne said. The production team quickly put fans into place and started opening windows. They worked their way around the challenge area before getting to my location. They made a show of acting like the window had been jammed. I put my base into the oven and walked around to grab my chocolate at the end of my bench, and to my surprise, it was already melting. As I grabbed it, I felt a rush of hot air go by my hands. I poked my head over to investigate to see a vent jammed open and pumping hot air over my station. No way! My ganache was never going to survive this. "Hey, Samantha, when you have a minute, can you come see this?" I asked, waiting for a camera to come by and pick it up. She walked over and almost jumped away instantly as she stepped into the gale-force volcanic winds that were pumping out of my vent. "Sheesh, someone needs to fix the air control in here." "Sorry, is it hot over here? I can leave," Tama joked. This lip service seemed to be the only response we were going to get, as the whole production team seemed to be in no hurry to do anything. Samantha waved me over. "Move your stuff here. It's a little colder, and at least you and I will be on the same playing ground." I started moving some of the stuff over to her station, but I paused a bit. Even only moving part of it, I was already taking up so much of her space. We were going to be working completely on top of each other. If I lost because of this, that would be one thing, but I did not want to drag Samantha down with me. Dylan seemed to notice this and waved me over. Hey, put your cheesecake stuff over there and make your ganache over here. It's pretty cool over here, so it'll be easier to keep your ganache from melting. I smiled, my brow still shimmering with sweat. I started doing as Dylan suggested and moved my stuff over there. I ran back and forth between the 3 stations, always making sure to keep an eye on my base. Not that it mattered. The chocolate base would be hard to tell by visuals alone if it got under or overdone. Dylan at some point moved a damp towel into the freezer. I took my base out and got it into the fridge as fast as I could to cool it for the cheesecake filling. Then I ran back over to my filling to do my last bit of mixing. My vision blurred and I stumbled as I went back to Samantha's station. I was overheating like crazy. My sleeves were already rolled up, my hair tied up to get it off my neck. I had to pause for a minute. I saw out of the corner of my blurry eyes Dylan running to the freezer. He pulled out his cold, damp towel and brought it over to me, pressing it to my forehead. Hey, just take it easy. You got plenty of time. You're doing great, he said reassuringly. The freezing towel felt like the most refreshing thing I had ever felt in my entire life. I took it from him and held it to my head. He brought over a glass of water and guided it to my mouth, only letting me take small sips so I did not overdo it. I noticed the cameras on him and me as we shared this moment. What was their end, truly? It could not be to make Will They Won't They television. I would be featured in my intro reel as a happily married lesbian. Maybe they wanted me to feel bad for leading Dylan on. Well, I have no problem putting a stop to that. Dylan, I have something to tell you, I said. What's that, An? You're a great guy and all, but I should let you know. The cameras turned away from us, no longer interested in something not a part of their narrative. I scowled a bit at them and let it interrupt my train of thought. That you're married to a woman, right? Dylan asked. Oh, you knew? Yeah, I'm not some kind of lunatic that thinks you have to go out with me just because I was nice to you. I genuinely just think you're a good person and want to help you. Good thing my face was covered with an icy towel because I would be heating up with embarrassment from the assumption I had made about him. He started to step back towards his station. Now let's get back to it. I nodded. I finished my filling and loaded up my cakes and put them back into the oven. Then I grabbed some damp towels and put them in the freezer. I got to work on my ganache. Everyone in the impact area, meaning Samantha, Dylan, and myself, seemed to struggle a bit with not having it completely run off. On our second attempt, I got to reveal my secret strategy. I gave each of them a cold towel to manipulate the temperature of their chocolate. We got our cheesecakes out of the oven, chilled them as quickly as we could, then covered them both with ganache and barely beat the buzzer of Bahama's voice. All right, bakers, hands off the cheesecakes. I used my now just damp, not that cold towel to wipe the sweat off my face. I gave Dylan a high five and tried to do the same for Samantha, but she just pulled me in for a hug. I think she regretted it as she left with an imprint of myself on her apron in sweat. I felt as the heat kicked off and stopped coming through my vent. Convenient timing, to be sure. We all put our bakes up at the table for judging. Cheyenne notably was not concerned about where she put hers this time. Penelope re-entered the room without any fanfare and just started tasting the cakes. She started with Cheyenne. This one's good. Good ganache, good cheesecake. I think the base is a bit overdone. Then Marcus. A real triumph, worth every calorie. Then Dylan. The ganache on this one is a bit runny and messy, and the base is underdone. Still good. Then mine. Very runny, very messy ganache. Cheesecake's not quite set. Flavor's good, though. Then Samantha's. Same issue. Runny, messy, and not properly set. I'm guessing temperature was a problem in here. Yeah, I guess you could say the asteroid was a problem for the dinosaurs, too, I thought to myself. I gritted my teeth. There was no good outcome for this one. Even without Peter's help, there seemed to be a strategically coordinated attack that bypassed Cheyenne entirely and only hit us in the blast zone. Penelope looked over the bakes, trying to not give anything away, but I could tell she was eyeing mine and Samantha's. As she went down the line, my suspicions were confirmed as she started with Marcus, then Cheyenne, then Dylan. I held Samantha's hand tightly. And in fourth place, we have this one, she said. I started crying. I gripped Samantha's hand tightly. She had pointed to mine, but it gave me no relief. Not this time. Dylan and Marcus came over to give Samantha a hug and say their goodbyes. I stepped away for a bit. I saw Cheyenne eyeing me. Her expression looked a mix of judgmental and confused. I looked up at her from my tears. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask her if she knew. Did she know what she was doing every time she cheated her way to the next round? I felt unplanned words ready to spill out of my mouth when Samantha suddenly hugged me. Honey, I need you to get through for me. she said. I don't deserve to. You don't deserve to. None of that now. I need you to get justice for me. For all of us. You understand that? Promise me. I nodded as tears started streaming down my face. I hugged her back tightly, not ever wanting to let go. After a while, though, she broke the hug and went off with the production team. I was still sniffling uncontrollably as I went to get my equipment taken off of me. None of the audio people made any comments to me as they worked to methodically remove my microphone, but I could feel their apprehensive stares as usual. For now, though, I couldn't be bothered to care. I just went back to my cabin, exhausted from the day. I woke up the next morning. I was slow to get out of bed. I looked at all the ingredients dropped off at my door with absolute disgust. I had no desire to bake right now. I had no desire to do anything but just lay back down. Despite it all, I willed myself on, using Samantha's words to motivate myself to practice. It was too late to do anything else. I had let everyone down. I just needed to make it through one last challenge. The last challenge was always celebrated with a picnic for all the friends and family of the contestants who made it. I practiced and practiced and practiced until my legs were so wobbly I could not even stand. With everything taken out of me, I collapsed into bed around 7 in the evening. I was racked with frightening thoughts. The thought that I could not be sure that they would ever let me leave here. The thought that they could change whatever they wanted on the fly, and I would be helpless to stop them. There was nothing I could do to control that, though. I had to stay focused on what I could control, which was winning. At some point I must have passed out. Luckily, despite never having a chance to set an alarm, my body was adjusting to waking up at dawn to get ready for the day's challenges. Today would be the semifinal, the penultimate challenge of the competition. It was the only challenge on the day's schedule, so I could feel free to go out and burn all my energy on it. I assessed my situation as I got hooked up in the lodge. If Cheyenne and company had found a way to cheat again, it would be difficult to beat her, but not impossible now that Penelope was doing the judging. I had toyed with the idea of playing dirty, doing something to ruin her bake while no one was looking, but the risk was too high. Marcus was a mountain too high to climb from a distance, but you never know. It only takes one misstep in the lodge to get eliminated. Not that I was rooting for that to happen. It was just I felt less guilty about him than the last and most likely option to allow me to get through. Dylan was roughly in the same league as me. Maybe a tad bit better and more consistent. His consistency was what let me outperform him at times, though. He had done so much for me throughout this whole journey, and I severely misjudged his character and motivations for doing so. In my ideal world, it was for sure Marcus, Dylan, and myself who got to go home safely after all of this. I walked into the kitchen. These thoughts would not push me to victory. Only my own focus and baking skills could do that. I tightened my apron and braced myself as the hosts and Penelope walked into the kitchen. I saw Peter following shortly behind, but he sat off screen in a corner of the room, glaring at me. The hell was he mad about? None of his friends were executed. His life was not on the line. I noticed from where I was standing, the glare could have been meant for me, or for Cheyenne, behind me, who seemed to be averting her eyes. Oh, that might make more sense. Did she call off her fling because she no longer saw any use for him? How fair-weathered of her. In a way, that made me feel the slightest bit of relief. Maybe there was some hope for my ideal scenario after all. I cannot let myself relax, though. Undoubtedly, on the list of people responsible for Peter's anger, I ranked highest on the scale. I was not by any means safe. All right, bakers, the semifinals, Bahama said. You must be all so proud to make it this far. Just one more leg of your exciting adventure. Exciting is not the word I would use. Today, our challenge is breakfast-themed. Penelope would like you to make a breakfast bake of your choice to pair with ice cream. Yum, Tama added. 3, 2, 1, bake. I started to rush to gather everything I would need to get set up, but had little time before Penelope, flanked by both hosts, came over to me. So, An, can I expect another treat with some of your delicious Vietnamese flavor flair? She asked. You sure can, Penelope. I'm making some pandan waffles with a coconut ice cream side. Oh, sounds lovely. Can't wait to try. She smiled and pleasantly walked off towards Cheyenne. The two hosts shot me nasty glances. It felt fair to say that everyone in this competition was embedded in some kind of subterfuge other than her. I tried to pay it no mind as I started to prepare my waffle mix. I opened up my eggs and nearly gagged. They were rotten. It reminded me of the time that my apartment with Leah had a gas leak. The technician who came out explained that they put something in the odorless gas that made it smell like rotten eggs so that people could identify it. Hey, Dylan, my eggs are no good. Can I borrow some of yours? I asked. Yeah, sure, you can take a few. I shouldn't need all of them. Borrow some of mine too, hotshot, Marcus said. Though I don't bet you plan on returning them. I laughed and collected the eggs I needed from my neighbors. They did not have the same smell at all. I saw aggravated glances from the production team. What were they expecting? Did they think I was just going to lay down and take it as they sabotaged me? No, I owed it to Samantha, to Miguel, to Maya, Harold, Johnny, and Wyatt. I would get them their justice. I smelled the coconut milk. They felt no need to tamper with it, which was a critical mistake because it was the only thing in this room I could not replace. I noticed a consistency issue with my flour. After close inspection, I realized it was cut with salt. I laughed a little. A camera came up to me and asked what was going on. "It looks like there's salt accidentally mixed in with this flour," I said. "It's a good thing you have to sift the flour anyway." I got out my sieve and started sifting the flour out, eliminating any clumps or salt particles that made their way in there. For a production team on a baking show, their baking knowledge was insufficient for something even as simple as trying to kneecap me. I continued on, noticing with ease every single way they tried to antagonize me. Expired and clumpy sugar, cream that was spiked with something I could not identify. Most of their screw-ups came down to their failure to account for the fact that Dylan and Marcus mostly shared the ingredients I had, and had no issues sharing them with me. After the third or so request, I caught the look of recognition on Dylan's face when he realized what was going on with the sabotage. Marcus, I think, was so in his own little world of baking that he never even pieced it together. Cheyenne seemed to notice, too. I caught her glancing each time that I asked for ingredients, and noticed her look towards Peter out of the corner of her eye nervously. My ice cream was getting made, and it was now time to make my waffles. I put them in the waffle iron, and got a moment of reprieve while everything was in flight, not needing my attention. I sniffed a wonderful aroma coming from Dylan's station. "Dylan, what are you making?" He smiled. "I'm more of a savory breakfast kind of guy. I'm making some cheddar chive biscuits with a seaweed ice cream." That sounds delicious." Seaweed-flavored ice cream. Huh, I would have never thought of that. I love getting dry seaweed from my local Asian market, but I never thought about putting it in ice cream. Dylan also must have spent some time in America as well, because his biscuits looked more like what we would call scones here. I put my hands down near my station and nearly jumped. The air around my waffle iron was stifling hot. I grabbed an oven mitt and pulled out my waffles to see that they were already burned. No, I had just put those in there. They tampered with my equipment too? Dylan had clocked this and walked over to me with concern. I cut my burnt waffle to find that they were still not done inside. I had made enough batter for spares, but how was I going to make them without having the same result? I stood there, put my face in my hands, and fought the urge to cry again. "What's the matter, An?" Bahama said, voice taunting me. "Having some issues with the waffle iron?" I looked up at him, my watery eyes twitching with rage. I wanted so badly to start cursing him out. I wanted to hit him, to do anything to take out my anger and frustration that I had to stifle beneath the surface for so long. I never needed to do so, though, because Dylan came over and stiff-armed him right out of my personal space. "Back up, clown," he said. "An, what's the issue?" Bahama looked enraged at this interference, but slowly stepped away. I whispered to Dylan, "I have my waffle iron on the lowest setting, but no matter what, it's on max temperature. I'm not going to get an even bake on any of them." Dylan looked at the waffle iron. He unplugged it and moved my batter closer to me. "Put it in now. We'll open and close it and turn it on and off as needed," he said. "We'll toggle the heat until we can get an even bake." "They'll come out all inconsistent," I protested. "Better than inedible?" he retorted. I gave up on fighting him and just put them in and did as he said. The first one was very overdone on the outside, due to going in at the peak of the heat. As we got into a rhythm, though, I started to find the balance of when to turn the perpetually max heat waffle iron on and off to make a waffle that was mostly done throughout evenly. Dylan coached me through and took over so that I could get my ice cream out. We got the last of my waffles as he went back to get his ice cream ready. I plated it up with only a few minutes left on the clock. I turned around, knowing in normal circumstances I should never compare myself to others, and especially not now. Cheyenne's chocolate crepes and raspberry ice cream looked delectable. Marcus made some cinnamon buns and vanilla ice cream that I'm sure would be beyond belief. It was over for me. I started to cry again. Hey, don't cry. It's going to be okay," Dylan said. "No, it's not. Mine are a mess of colors, inconsistent, and some of them are barely edible." Dylan smiled. For the first time since meeting him, I wanted to punch him in the face. There was no reason for him to have that smirk. Wait a minute. I stared at him in shock. "You noticing it now?" he asked. "My cheddar chive biscuits should have been taken out of the oven 10 minutes ago." He went over and opened and pulled out what looked like dark rocks. I gasped upon seeing them. "Dylan, no!" He just smiled at me. While he was helping me, his breakfast bakes were burning in the oven, and he knew it. He threw the competition for me. He had no idea what fate awaited him. All right, bakers, time is up. Dylan swiftly plated his meal in what could have definitely been considered post-call moving of his bake. No one seemed to call him out on it, though. I stood looking on in abject fear. Penelope quickly started working her way around in the same order that she came around the first time. She had some of my ice cream and followed it with my waffle. Ice cream is delicious, she said. Waffles are a bit disappointing, poorly baked, and all across the board in terms of color. We'd like to see some more uniformity, especially at this stage. I nodded, completely speechless from Dylan's unwitting death dive. I waited until they went all the way around to his table. Penelope looked shocked to see his scones, called biscuits by him. What happened here? She asked. Forgot about them in the oven, he lied. She tried both the ice cream and the bakes. The seaweed ice cream is interesting. I can't say I'm the biggest fan. And more importantly, these are rock hard and very unpleasant. Quite disappointing. Sorry, Penelope, he said. She went back to confer with the host and get a bit of real footage of her talking about the bakes. Dylan came over to me with a stupid smile on his face. Told you that you had nothing to worry about, he said. Dylan, you don't understand. They really would have been great if I had made them the right way. I know. In my practice, they were to die for. He tapped his nose at the tail end of that. My eyes widened. I must not have been nearly as inconspicuous as I thought I was when I was telling Samantha. But Dylan, why? I told you. I think you're a genuinely good person and I want to help you, he said. I don't get the full extent of what's going on here, so you're the only hope we have. I started to cry again. The host reconvened in the front. Bakers, as much as we'd love to have all of you in the finals, Bahama said, one of you must go. And unfortunately, the one of you who won't be joining us is... I just covered my face with my hands. Dylan. I ran over, tears pouring out of me, and hugged him so tightly. He hugged me back and whispered in my ear. Keep fighting on, he said. The real hard part starts once you get out of this lodge. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you might think might also enjoy. Once again, thanks to Trang from Runaway Rice for the recipe that served as the inspiration in this episode. You can find her recipes at runawayrice.com. Wonderful Baking Lodge is a D Squared Stories production. You can stay up to date with Wonderful Baking Lodge and all future D Squared Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D Squared Stories across just about any of the big platforms. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.